Welcome everybody, welcome to another video here on Power Staples. I am Teecee. Today we're looking at one of my newest modern decks, which is actually Pelt Zoo, which is built around the Pelt Collector, which is a very new card from Guilds of Ravnica that Wizard gave to us, and this card is very beneficial to this whole deck. The whole idea is to have aggressive creatures with converted mana cost 1 if possible. So we have cards like Wild Cuddle and Goblin Guide and stuff like that, but we can also play many cards that are not quite usually to play in this deck. For example, Death Shadow, which of course is very familiar to postmodern players, like in Grixis Death Shadow decks and something like that. But it also works with Vexing Devil and anything else that many players may think of. Why are these cards in this deck actually? And the answer is because Pelt Collector is so efficient that these cards work very well with it. Pelt Collector is for 1 green mana and Elf Warrior, this is 1/1. It says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control or dies, if that creature's power is greater than Pelt Collector's, put a +1/+1 counter on Pelt Collector. So this is just like an involved trigger, but it's even greater because it not only works when the creature enters the battlefield under your control, and it also works when the creature dies on your side of the battlefield. So Vexing Devil comes in handy that way, because when it dies, and because of this ability it has, when it enters the battlefield, opponent may choose Vexing Devil to dealt 4 damage to him or her, and when that player decides to do that, then Vexing Devil is sacrificed, and so both of these triggers will happen, and then Pelt Collector will receive not only 1 but also 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And when the opponent decides to let it stay, it's a 4/3, so it's also very efficient for this aggro beatdown strategy. And also Pelt Collector has another ability that says as long as Pelt Collector has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has Trample. Especially in combination with cards like Mutagenic Growth, for instance, so it can really work towards and do the damage through. So this is very nice to keep in mind. So we always love to have a Pelt Collector in your opening hand, if you also have green mana of course, so we can play it on turn 1, and this is very efficient because we can follow up on turn 2, like to play other cards, like for example a Goblin Guide and stuff like that, and then also working towards to play like all the other things, like a 3 power creature like a Wild Cuddle for example, if you have both of these land types out. And then we also follow up with Vexing Devil, which will all trigger Pelt Collector. So if it's best use for it, you can play like a Goblin Guard on turn 2 and also follow it up by Vexing Devil. And when your opponent decides he wants to have 4 damage dealt to him or her, and the Vexing Devil dies, then you have a 4/4 creature on turn 1 with also this trample ability. This is very powerful to keep that in mind, and it also can grow even further simply because we have Death Shadow in there. For 1 black mana it's a very small creature for it first, because you have to lose a lot of life, but in this deck of course we have so many ways to deal damage to ourselves with all these combinations of the street recycling for example, and also all these 10 fetch lands and all these shock duels and anything. So this is very likely. Also we would possibly like to bolt ourselves if it's really going away to victory. So it's very possible that this gets really big like on turn 3 or 4. And when it dies, then we also get these abilities going. So this is the way this deck works. So we have so many other creatures. They are very great way to make sure that our assault is getting through and we're doing so much with it. For example, like Goblin Guide, for 1 red mana, it's a staple in many other decks in Modern. For example, in burn decks, it's a 2/2 creature with haste, a Goblin Scout, and when it attacks, defending player reveals the top card of his or her library. Then if it's a land card, the player puts that land into his or her hand. So the problem right there is whenever the opponent gets a land, it's just beneficial to them, but we also have to keep in mind that we can see the cards the opponent is revealing. So possibly something that we have to keep in mind, for example, like if they have a removal spell or a mass wipe or something like that, and also possible other ways to work around for like a life gain spell or something. So we can most likely find a way to work towards with all these instants that we have, or this mutagenic growth that we have on this lightning bolts. Possibly there is a way to play around that because we've seen that card. So this is not really a problem, and as long as it's not a land card, then the card returns on top of the owner's library, and that's not really a problem right there because we see what the opponent is going to get. And of course there's Experiment 1. There are only 2 copies here in this deck because of course there's Pelt Collector, the most greatest card here in this slot. So we can only play like 4 Pelt Collectors for sure. So these are like Pelt Collector 5 and 6 for instance. So Experiment 1 is for 1 green mana, 1/1 Human Ooze with Evolve. And that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, if that creature is greater power or toughness then this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this is like the same thing, but it's not a die trigger, of course, not the Pelt Collector has. It also doesn't gain trample, but it has another special ability that says we could remove 2 +1 counters from Experiment 1, and then we regenerate Experiment 1. It's something just to keep in mind. It's not that much used for it, but not forget about it. For example, when opponent master wipes or something, we could, if that is like a damage spell, for example Anger of the Gods, then we could possibly use that ability to remove the 2 counters it has and then regenerate it, for example, if we want to, but that's not very much coming in out of use. Then we have White Nakatl. Of course, it's also kind of like a staple in so many decks. It's very nice. It's Naya Burn or Naya Midrange. Every decks like that use that card. For 1 green mana, it's a Krat Warrior. First, it is a 1/1, but it gets +1/+1 as long as you control a mountain, and it also gets +1/+1 as long as you control a plains. So of course we have all these shock duels out, all these stomping grounds and all the Sacred Foundry and stuff, so it is very likely that this cat is always a 3/3 creature, like on turn 2. Of course it is not possible on turn 1, but it's possible on turn 2. And it can also grow. You do not get the counters on it, it just simply grows right there, because when you get another land on turn 2, very possibly with all these 10 fetch lands and stuff, that you will hit all your 3 mana sources, and you always are going to get most likely a plains and a mountain sooner or later, and of course the forest, for example, to play this card, the green mana right there. And then it's very likely that this cat is a 2/2 on turn 2, and it's a 3/3 on turn 3 most efficiently. So this is also something that Pelt Collector is looking for. So this gets the chain going, like Pelt Collector on turn 1, then for example a Goblin Guide on turn 2 followed by White Nakatl. This is also a great way to make this Pelt Collector grow, and when it has all these counters on it, it also gets trample, and this is very interesting. And then there's Vexing Devil. As I mentioned, it's very good to have him in this deck. For 1 red mana, it's a 4/3 devil creature, and Vexing Devil enters the battlefield, then opponent may have it deal 4 damage to him or her, and if a player does, Vexing Devil is sacrificed. So this is not really that problem when Pelt Collector is out. Otherwise, of course, it's a 4 damage spell for 1 red mana. Of course, it's just like a Goblin Bomb, where you do not have to sacrifice a Goblin, so it's very nice. 4 damage, not 5 what a Goblin Grenade wears, but it's a very great way to deal 4 damage to opponent. But of course, the choice is theirs, and that's the big problem on this. Because opponent can let it stay, for example, if they have a Lightning Bolt or something to take care of that 4/3 creature that way. But of course, it's very nice when Pelt Collector is out. First of all, it's very big, it's with 4 power. So when Pelt Collector is out, it's most likely will get a counter of it, because it will be with greater power than Pelt Collector is. And then when it dies, when the opponent decides for you not to have this 4/3 creature on like a turn 2, then opponent will deal 4 damage to him or her, prefers to do that with Vexing Devil, and then the Pelt Collector gets 2 counters on this deck right there. So this is very nice. Also, it really works well with Claim to Fame, but we'll review that later. It's also a great way to support the Vexing Devil right there. And then there's Death Shadow. Yeah, that's of course one of the biggest guys in this deck. In most decks, most likely. Very strong. For 1 black mana, it's a printed 13/13 avatar. Of course, that has a downside. Sure, it has to be. Then Death Shadow gets -X/-X, where X is your life total. And as I mentioned, normally also like many other decks that use Death Shadow, it's not a big deal to always harm yourself with all these fetch lands and shock duels. You can do this very aggressively. You can always shock in your shock duels. It's not that big of a deal. Of course, you do not need to die. You have to keep some points up for sure. Being out of an opponent's bolt range or something like that is what you have to keep in mind to make sure that this works really well in your favor, and it's not letting you die because you're so aggressive with all your stuff. But as soon as it hits the battlefield, it gets really huge if you just keep harming yourself. And also this is why cards like Dismember and Mutagenic Growth are in there, because you can always pay the Phyrexian mana and not the mana for that. You can pay 2 life for each mana you want to save that way. So this is very most likely a creature that will hit very hard, and will be at least with 5 power, which is the greatest creature in our deck. So Pelt Collector will get a counter, and right there, when the opponent can destroy Death Shadow and it's not removed from the game when it dies, then Pelt Collector also gets another +1/+1 counter most likely. So this is very nice, especially if you find ways like to cycle a Street Wrath, or you sacrifice a fetch land, you pay 1 life or 2, and then you will get an additional trigger because the Death Shadow is even greater when it dies than when it has been when it entered the battlefield. So very, very powerful in this deck. And of course it's a very fast clock, never to say that. Then there's Burning 3 Emissary. Another wonderful card in this deck. Why is this card in this deck? It looks a little bit strange at first, but of course it's very nice when it adds up, when you find multiple of these Burning 3 Emissaries in your hand. It's very, very nice. The more the merrier, of course, that when you play it for 2 mana, and it's just like Gruul mana, it's red and or green. 2 hybrid mana, it's a human shaman, it's 2/2. And when Burning 3 Emissary enters the battlefield, you add red and green mana to your mana pool. So this is also very nice, because first of all, when you play a Burning 3 Emissary and you get these 2 mana, of course you could pay for another Burning 3 Emissary, and then you also get the mana from the next one. So this really adds up. If you have multiple copies of this card and you're also not worried about like a mass wipe, then go for it. You can put multiples of these out. This is nice, of course. And that's not all. If you have this mana, of course you can use it for anything. You just get it. It doesn't have any restrictions like you have to play creature spells or something. You can use it for anything you want, any spells in your hand. But if you're in the situation where you could use a Reckless Bushwaker, then go for it. It's just a great synergy right there. Because Reckless Bushwaker is a creature for 2 and a red mana. It's a 2/1 Goblin Warrior ally, and it has Search. And Search means you may play this card for a search cost if you or a teammate, so it's you, has cast another spell this turn. Because in a 1-on-1 duel it's most certainly yourself, and the search cost is 1 and 1 red mana. And when you cast, for example, one of your Burning 3 Emissaries and you get this 2 mana in your mana pool, then Reckless Bushwalker comes into play with the search cost. So of course this works very well, because you have cast at least 1 spell this turn, which is Burning 3 Emissary most likely. So this comes into play for 2 mana then, and when it enters the battlefield, if its search cost was paid, then other creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. And this also works with Burning 3 Emissaries that you cast previously, of course. And for also so many other cards, when it enters the battlefield, anything gets haste, it has haste himself, so it also can attack. And then you'll be able to smash in and do some great and alpha strike, so your opponent is helpless to recover, hopefully. So this is really nice. Also provides all your creatures to have haste. Also all these cards like Death Shadows and Vexing Devils and stuff, we do not have haste normally. So this really can get out of hand very quick. Then we have Street Wraith. It's for 5 mana, 3 and 2 black, a 3/4 Wrath creature, but it doesn't see play very often. You pay 2 life and then you cycle Street Wraith, so you discard it and you draw another card, which is most likely very efficient, first of all, to get more cards going, to add up on speed, on the draw speed that you have. But it's also nice to damage yourself. For example, with the Death Shadow, it's a nice combination always to run Street Wraith in a deck where Death Shadow is involved. It's just like getting mutagenic growth for Death Shadow possibly. You can do this and then it instantly grows a little bit more if necessary, and you also get to draw a card, which is nice anyway. For example, to find all your other Bushwakers and to find removal and to find a lightning bolt and something like this. And also keep in mind, if you cycle the Street Wraith and it ends up in your graveyard, then it's also most likely very efficient when your opponent is playing really like a living end strategy, and then you could get this creature back, and it's a 3/4 creature with Swamp Walk. Why not? Then of course we have Lightning Bolt. This of course not need to say too much about it. For 1 red mana, it's an instant, it deals 3 damage to any target, so it is always very nice, also especially when you add up, when you draw multiple of those, to make it happen. So an opponent is sort of in a very low life total, you can certainly get a free win out of here, because you are bolting his or her face pretty much with that. Of course also it gives you the range there. When your opponent has built up a wall you cannot attack, for example like multiple Tarmogoyfs and stuff like that, or something like a Ghostly Prison or something like that, then it's most likely the case then you can just burn your opponent out. It's not that much of burn, only for Lightning Bolts and not all this other stuff that burn decks have, but it's a very nice way. And also for 1 red mana, it's an instant, it can destroy many creatures in Modern. Then of course we have some other spells in this deck. Yes, I mentioned Mutagenic Growth. For 1 green mana, which is also possible to be paid as in Phyrexian mana, you can pay 2 life instead of paying the mana that you actually pay from your lands and from your mana pool, let's say that. So you can pay 2 life, and then you can play the Mutagenic Growth kinda like for free. And then it's an instant that says target creature get +2/+2 until end of turn. It's just like a giant growth that you do not pay mana for if you do not want to. Of course, you can always pay the green if you are running low on life total, but you do not have to. It's just your choice. And it also works really well with cards like Pelt Collector that have trample when they have it. So it's nice when you can just pump it through, and also other creatures when they're just unblocked and you can put the damage through or something like that. And also like a simple combo trick like on Alpha, it's always good to have a giant growth in hand, which again growth is even better, even if it's not that big, but it's very nice as a surprise when you're tapped out, and you always get to do this. And you also can possibly make a creature survive when an opponent like bowls your white Nakatl or something. You have the choice to mutagenic growth it so it survives possibly if you like to. And there's also one dismember in the deck. I didn't have so much room for so much stuff. For 1 generic mana and then also 2 mana which are also Reflexion mana for 2 black, but you also, for each of those you can pay 2 life instead of paying the 1 black mana there. So of course it's like possible you can pay 2 life and play 1 black mana and 1 generic, or you can just play it for 1 generic mana, one of any color, and then for 4 life you pay. And then any target creature you point on that gets -5/-5 until end of turn, which is a combo trick against even bigger creatures, but most certainly it can take out many of the creatures out there in Modern these days. So this is very efficient. Also nice when the creature is, for example, able to regenerate and stuff, or it's indestructible or something like that. This will work, so this is nice to have this in the deck. So I do not want multiples of those, because lightning bolt is always very nice. You can bolt the face and something like that. You can deal damage to your opponent, and this card most certainly ends up in your hand if it's not used when you're playing like against bottles or something. So you have to side it out then. And there's also one Claim to Fame, which is also a very great card. It's a sorcery. First, for 1 black mana you get this claim side of this card. You return a creature card with converted mana cost of 2 or less from your graveyard into play. This is also very nice with Vexing Devil. When your opponent decides to have it deal 4 damage to him or her, then it's sacrificed and you will get it back. And also of course it works really well with many creatures in this deck, with all these Pelt Collectors back and whatever you like, whatever your heart desires. Then of course Death Shadow is one of the premium targets for sure. And then when it's in the graveyard, then you can also use this Fame side. For 1 and a red mana, then you can use this sorcery with Aftermath. Then when you play it from your graveyard, then afterwards it's removed from the game. And it says that 1 creature you control, target creature, gets +2/+0 and haste until end of turn, which is also very nice with Death Shadow and always Vexing Devil. Imagine when the opponent decides to make you sacrifice the Vexing Devil, it's dealing 4 damage to him or her, and then you can return it with Claim. And you can also, if you have 3 mana available in total, you can also use that Fame side right away after you put it into play with Claim. Then you can also pay the Fame side and it gets +2/+0 and haste. And then of course we have the land base. It is very very nice that all this stuff is there for make sure that Death Shadow is as big as possible. You can be very aggressive with all your lands. We have 10 fetch lands in there. Of course there's 4 Wooded Foothills, 4 Bloodstead Mire and 2 Arid Mesa. And then there's 2 basic lands, 1 mountain and a forest for sure. Especially with all these cards like Path to Exile around and all this stuff. For example, they're using Field of Ruin and Ghost Quarter, so it's nice to have 2 basic lands in the deck that you can fetch for possibly. And also when you do not have to torture your life total even more, you want to, but sometimes it's just not a very good idea to get into board range or something like this, then of course you have 2 basic lands in there. And then there are the shock duels. Of course there's 1 Blood Crypt, 1 Temple Garden, 1 Sacred Foundry and 1 Overgrown Tomb, as well as 2 Stomping Grounds, to make sure you have everything, all the tools you need, to make sure you have all the mana you need, and also that the white Nakatl will be a 3/3 creature on turn 2 possibly, and also all this efficiency of the cards you need, taking the lands out of your deck to make sure you get better draws possibly, and also making sure that your Death Shadow is really really huge in times like in turn 3 or 4. And you have to be very aggressive with all your lands coming into play untapped, doing 2 damage to you, always for the big case to make sure that all this happens along. That Vexing Devil is very very big for instance, and all these other cards will work very much in your favor. So this is a very aggressive deck and you have to play aggressively, and this is what you do with this list pretty much. And of course make sure that so many cards will cost only 1 mana, There are many cards in this deck that only have the converted mana cost of 1, also some spells. So this is not the problem because we have Ingot Chewer in the sideboard. And let's move on to the sideboard real quick. In the sideboard we have a lot of creatures right there, simply because Pelt Collector is so focused on letting creatures enter the battlefield and or die. So this is very most likely the greater situation right there to support the Pelt Collector strategy we are running here. So first of all, with Evoke, this is a very nice combination when the creature enters the battlefield with the Evoke costs, and then it has an effect when it enters the battlefield, like Shriekmaw destroying a non-artifact, non-black creature. And then also with Ingot Chewer, it's very nice to destroy target artifact, for example the Chalice of the Void on 1, which you do not like to see, I'm pretty sure. And then they also come into play with the Evoke costs, and when they enter the battlefield and this effect is on the stack, and they also will be sacrificed due to their effect. So this is also very efficient right there, because Pelt Collector could possibly trigger twice. And then also Shriekmaw comes into play as a 3/2 creature. It also have Fear. Why not? This is sometimes really coming in handy. As a graveyard removal I prefer to use Rest in Peace. But in this deck here, it's one of the newest cards from M19. Remorseful Cleric does a really great job for this deck. For 1 in the white mana, it's a 2/1 flying creature, it's a spirit, and you can sacrifice it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. And then there's Talia, Guardian of Thraben. I like her a lot, she's a wonderful card in this deck. Only in the sideboard in this deck. It's a real bit sad. I like to play it in humans decks and also like in Maverick and Legacy. It's seen so much play. It's everywhere. It's in Land and it's in Death and Texas. Very strong card. For 1 in the white mana, it's a 2/1 creature with first strike. It's legendary, so there are only 2 copies in the sideboard anyhow. As long as Talia is in play, non-creature spells cost 1 more mana to cast. So this is very nice because our deck is mostly creatures. Not everything, but mostly, and many other decks don't have that, like Storm or something. They cannot stop that way. It's not possible to storm off when there's a Talia on the battlefield. They have to get rid of it. And it also delays burn. Of course, when they only have 2 lands in play or something, they could not bolt us with 2 different cards for 6 damage, because you have to pay another mana for like a lightning bolt or stuff. So it delays burn a lot. This is also very nice. We have to win all these aggro matchups. So we also have to win the burn matchup, pretty sure. And Death Shadow strategies are most likely not in favor to win burn matchups. So this is what this deck needs. And this is what helps along with combinations like that. And let's move on to the other creatures of this deck. There are 2 Selfless Spirits into here. 2 Selfless Spirits in here. For 1 in a white mana, it's a 2/1 flying creature, just as Remorseful Cleric. But this has the ability that you can sacrifice it when it's on the battlefield, and all your other creatures, of course, he is sacrificed, so he's out of the question. Then other creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So this is very nice to survive a board wipe, like let's say a Wrath of God or something like this. And also when it comes to blocking stab or attacking stab an opponent blocks, this is a very nice combo trick to make sure that anything else survives. And make sure you can make very great trades, especially if you're in the defensive and have to block, which is not certainly going to happen in this very aggressive deck, but sometimes it's necessary. So this is very nice, so opponent cannot throw like Anger of the Gods and stuff against you and make your board like crumble. So there's Kataki, War's Wage. It's just another legendary spirit for 1 in a white. It's another 2/1 creature. It's legendary, so there's only 1 of them in the deck. And it says that all artifacts have an upkeep cost of 1 mana during the upkeep of the player who controls it. And when the player does not pay that 1 mana of any color as an upkeep cost, then that certain artifact who the opponent does not pay for the trigger is then sacrificed. We don't have that many artifacts, let's say we have 0. This is very powerful, especially against all these decks like Affinity and all these lantern controls and stuff. So many decks that are very helpless to recover from that because they cannot pay for all their stuff. And then there's an enchantment in the sideboard, Alpine Moon ×2. When it enters the battlefield, lands your opponent's control lose all land types and abilities, and they can only tap for 1 mana of any color. It's just like a very cheap Blood Moon, cheap in the case that it's only one red mana. So this is really mana efficient in this deck. We most certainly don't have that much land. So this is very nice, because only if opponents has cards like spell pierce or something, it's most certainly possible to pay the 2 mana in addition when you play this card. So it is very nice that this has a converted mana cost of just 1 mana and not like all this other stuff like all this Blood Sun and Blood Moon and anything else, and also like Damping Sphere. This card is very nice because of the mana cost, that's why I play it right here. And there is one final card in the sideboard, Destructive Revelry, also a very nice card. It's an instant for 1 red and 1 green mana, and it says destroy target artifact or enchantment, and Destructive Revelry deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. So this is very nice that when you get to destroy an artifact or enchantment with a spell in a very aggressive deck, then you most certainly are not going to play that much other cards this turn. They are most efficient, most likely. So you have to remove cards, of course, it's why you put it in the deck. You have to get rid of like a Worship, a Ghostly Prison, or like an Ensnaring Bridge, stuff like that. But the good thing is that it also deals 2 damage to that artifacts or enchantments controller that you destroy. So you get like at least 2 points of damage out of the deal. You get cards 1 by 1, but you also get 2 damage done to your opponent and to finish him off most likely. So this is what this deck is all about. It's just about speed, and it's just about aggro, and it's just about mana efficiency. So it's just as cheap as it gets. Most cards are only for 1 mana each. So it's very, very nice. If it costs more, it's most likely one of these cards with all the search costs and stuff. When you're just like into a very big alpha strike that way, then it's just not a problem if you pay like 2 mana for it. But anything else is just so mana efficient with all these other cards, like all this stuff that you can get like almost for free or like even for free, like Mutagenic Growth. It's very, very nice. All the cycling abilities to make sure that you're getting the cards you need with all this thinning out lands of your deck by all these 10 fetch lands. It's a very, very great strategy. It's very powerful, it's very efficient, and it's very, very hard to recover from when you're your opponent. Because this deck is really hitting so hard. It's so fast and it's so efficient. Playing cards like Goblin Guides and stuff. It's just not like you play a fast deck, you're playing a good fast deck. And that's what I like about this deck a lot. Please leave a comment what you like about this deck and what you do not like. If you like and subscribe if you didn't have already. It would be very, very nice. I would appreciate it a lot. And that's about the deck tech for today. So make sure you stay tuned for more of these videos coming really soon. I guess Mudrotha, the EDH deck, will be next. Stay tuned. I'm Teecee and I will talk to you soon. Bye.